this computer. All right. Well, welcome to our small business hot topic. I'm Christy Morrell-Stinson with Significant Advantage, and tonight we are being hosted by Jude Nnadi of Paadio Consulting in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Jude is here live from the Small Business Center in Brooklyn Park. So Jude, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Jeff, for coming on stage to share with us. My name is Jude Nnadi. I'm the founder of Paadio. We're an inclusive economic development social enterprise. We're just like an oasis where entrepreneurs and small businesses find succor, where we plan and support small businesses to thrive. And we have some products that we provide to small businesses like Paadio Biz Blast, which is just only one business that supports small businesses with all kinds of features, CRM, email marketing, funnel websites, pipeline management, and so on and so forth. And we also have other products that we are developing, but traditionally we also do procurement business enterprise, where we support businesses to put all their stuff in one place and be ready for capital access, to be business ready, and to thrive. So these are some of the things we do at Paadio. And I welcome all of you, Alice, and Jeff and Christy for this program to share the information. I never heard about this until Christy told me. So I think everybody should pay attention. So over to you, Alice.
Thank you, Jude. My name is Alice Pallum. My work with Paadio and Jude, my company is AMP Business Coaching and Consulting, helping business owners navigate problem solving, how to manage their time, and be successful. So we provide some of those services through Paadio and the programs that Jude was just referring to. And Christy, would you like to introduce our special guest today?
Absolutely. So we called together this hot topic. It's kind of a pop-up business seminar here today, or not really a workshop, but definitely a broadcast with Jeff O'Brien, who is the business attorney that I typically recommend to people if they're in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. I know Jeff has decades of experience with small business, and he's going to talk to us about a critical topic that's affecting small businesses. That's a brand new requirement from the federal government. So Jeff, would you tell us what firm you're with and a little bit about your background, and then let's get into the topic.
Sure. And yeah, thank you, Christy and Alice and Jude for having me this evening. So I'm a business attorney, and then my other half of my practice is real estate law. But I'm kind of outside general counsel to small and closely held companies, mainly in Minnesota, but also in the surrounding states. I'm actually licensed in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and North and South Dakota. I've been practicing for over 23 years now, and I'm currently with the firm of Chestnut Cambronne, which is based in Minneapolis. We're about 34 attorneys at our firm in various disciplines. And so I do everything from forming businesses to negotiating contracts, sales and purchases of businesses. And then on the real estate side, it's just about everything. I do some security stuff as well, and some regulatory compliance for some niche industries, as well as some just everyday representation for, it could be employment, could be, if there's litigation, I have somebody to help with that. There's a lot of different things that we do, but we aim to be a full service law firm for small businesses and their owners.
Well, I know, Jeff, that every time I've reached out to you with a business owner challenge, that you have come immediately to the table. You guys have knocked it out of the park. If there was a different attorney that we needed from your firm, you've had them right on hand, and they've been so responsive. And so I'm just really pleased to have you tell us about this tonight, because I know that we're going to get the right information, and it's going to prevent problems for small business owners. And I know that one of the questions we'll get to, but I just want to touch on it right up front. Is this for all small business owners, regardless of how big they are?
Well, yeah, we'll get into that. It's for most small business owners. So there are some exemptions, but it's things like public companies and tax exempt nonprofits, credit unions, things like that. For the most part, I mean, and it's really broad. My understanding is they're going back. There's even some bills now in Congress to maybe narrow the scope of this, because they really swung wide at everything from if you have a cabin owned in a family cabin owned in an LLC,
Wow.
you have to comply with this law. So they're
Yeah.
revisiting it like any law. You know, you don't know what the unintended consequences are until it's implemented. So there are some fixers out there. But yes, for most people that own a small business, whether it be on their own or with partners, that this new law, the Corporate Transparency Act, is going to apply.
Okay, great. So I know we'll get into that in more detail, but I wanted to put that right up front because I don't want people to tune out and say, oh, well, this is for bigger businesses. It doesn't affect me because it's just me. I don't have any employees. Yeah, it probably does affect you. And so even a micro business or solo business owner, we're going to talk about the details there, but I just wanted to put that up front. So don't tune out just because you're a tiny micro business. So with that, Jeff, let's get into our list of questions. Tell us, first of all, what is this Corporate Transparency Act that's prompting all of this?
Sure. So if I use the term CTA, that's just lawyer short form for this new law. It's called the Corporate Transparency Act. Like you said, it's a new federal law. It was actually passed in 2021, and it was passed as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. So for some of you wondering, why in the world would Congress pass this? Well, it's not politically popular to vote against defense reauthorization bills. So everything that somebody wants gets shoved into the defense bill, and this got put in there, and but it didn't take effect until January 1st of this year. So we've actually, attorneys primarily, have been going to continuing education classes for the last 2 to 3 years, studying this thing and getting ready to be able to notify our clients as to what this thing is all about. But what it does, what CTA requires, is that small and mid-sized businesses have to file what's called a beneficial ownership information report with a specific unit of the U.S. Department of Treasury called the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. And then they have to update that report as certain things about the owners change. So it could be a change in ownership percentages. It could be as simply as someone gets a new driver's license, because you have to include that as part of your filing, or moves and changes an address, anything like that. Doing an estate plan and retitling your ownership interest in a company into a trust. All of those things are updates that the CTA requires be having an updated report filed.
Wow. So what's this purpose of the Corporate Transparency Act? It's to fight fraud. It's to fight
So
financial crimes.
The stated purpose of this, why we had to go through all of this, is to fight tax fraud, money laundering, financing of terrorism, and corruption. So there was some belief from somebody that by not having this ownership information on file, that it was making it easier for those things to occur. Now, I'm not aware, at least in my practice, I'm not aware of that occurring. I also understand that in a lot of other countries, they have similar laws like this. The US was one of the last big countries to adopt this type of reporting requirement. So that's the stated purpose of why they said it was necessary. And that's why when we talk about the businesses that are covered by this, you don't see the big public companies included, because they already report that information in their quarterly and annual reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC.
Right.
So this is why it's directed primarily at small businesses, the privately held companies that don't have those types of reports. This is their way of reporting to the federal government, much the same way that a public company reports to the SEC as to that information.
So what does the CTA require from small businesses?
Okay, so what it requires is that any person who is deemed to be in control of the business, and I'll come back to that, what that means, has to file this beneficial ownership information report and keep the information current, so update it as needed. So who's in control of an entity? It depends. So the act says anybody that has 25% or more ownership has to file this report. Any member of a board of directors or a board of governors, a manager of an LLC, an officer of a corporation, all of those individuals are considered beneficial owners and would have to report. If you have ownership in a trust and there's two trustees' signatures that are required to do anything for the trust, both trustees are considered beneficial owners and have to submit information. And this is one of those things where, in terms of planning, if you've got a entity with, say, multiple owners, let's say like a limited liability company, LLC, and you specify that you're manager managed, that doesn't necessarily mean that all the individual owners might have to report, because if you have a provision in something in your operating agreement that says these certain transactions require unanimous consent of the members, guess what? Even somebody that owns 10% or 5% has control over the entity, because they have that ability to veto certain transactions of the entity. So it's very broad who has to report, and that's part of what our task is. As we're going through these filings, particularly with multiple owners, is figuring out just who has to be reporting information into FinCEN.
Wow, Jeff. So it's really a sweeping act, and it's affecting millions and millions of small business. No.
Yeah, it touches almost every small business in the United States.
So I want to just turn to Alice for a minute. Alice, are you hearing people talk about this? Are you hearing small businesses talk about this?
I am not, which again gets to exactly what Jude was talking about, that this is so important to get out, because people are not hearing about it and taking action.
Absolutely. So Jude, how about you? Are you hearing anyone talk about this? Is it a topic that you're hearing come up? You're on mute.
All right, as usual. Yeah, nope, I don't hear anybody talk about it. And actually, I got a package from my bank saying that we need to report to so and so, and I think it could be something like this. They said that they will evaluate companies from time to time about their ownership and other stories. I just opened it. I didn't go detailed, but I think with the discussion we're having here and what Jeff is saying, it seems that even a big organization like bank maybe is even stepping ahead of that to wade into that, because I've never had that request from any bank for almost 20 years.
Yeah. And the reason that I was particularly wanting to do this event with Alice and Jude is because both of them have worked extensively with micro businesses, and businesses that don't have an office necessarily are affected. You might work from home. You might have an LLC set up, for some other purpose, like real estate investment. You might have a trust set up for your family, and yet this is going to affect you. And so I just think it's so important that if we have small business people in our networks, that we get the word out to them. All right,
Yeah,
Jeff.
it's just, if I can interject one thing in terms of how people have been notified, there has been a real lack of notification other than the professional advisors. We're working through giving notice to our clients, and who have a deadline. We'll talk about the deadlines in a little bit. But we're giving notice to our clients. I've seen other law firms that have put out notices. I've seen accounting firms, wealth advisors. If you file a new entity with the Minnesota Secretary of State, it kicks back a notification about this requirement. That's how it's getting out there. So it hasn't really been publicized um, to the general public, other than if you have a professional advisor or happen to be filing an entity with the state, what this requirement is.
Yeah.
So that's part of why we want to do something like this tonight,
Mhm.
just to educate business owners as to what they have to do and what can happen if they don't do it.
Very good, Jeff. Well, thank you for that. So tell us now, who is this FinCEN that we're hearing about, this enforcement network?
Yeah, so FinCEN is short for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's a bureau of the United States Department of the Treasury, just like the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS is a division of Treasury, right? Treasury has a whole bunch of different divisions, and this particular division, FinCEN, collects and analyzes information about financial transactions in the United States, and they're doing it to combat domestic and international money laundering or terrorist financing or other financial crimes. So it's
Wow.
it's an enforcement agency that is tasked with tracking where funds go, and particularly making sure that they aren't going for illicit purposes in the country. That's what FinCEN is, and that's why the reporting requirement is going to them, so they have information on owners of business entities.
So like the show Ozark on Netflix. I don't know if anybody here knows what I'm talking about. If you don't, go watch it. If you do, you'll kind of laugh with me, though it's not that funny. But that had to do with financial crimes being carried out through small business takeovers.
Mm.
Anyway, so this is really about preventing money laundering and fraud.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
corruption.
Yeah. So everything from, say, the phishing attacks where the fake wire instructions and all those kinds of scams, all that kind of stuff is all under the purview of FinCEN. And as everybody knows, I don't know what your email looks like, but on an almost daily basis, you get, at least a half dozen phishing emails that you're invited to click on and then somehow give more information, and suddenly they're trying to get access to a bank account or get you to wire funds to some other place. That's that kind of activity that leads to the federal government putting in place things like the Corporate Transparency Act, so they can track down who's behind these entities that are doing this.
So the next question is, okay, so is my business, each one of us needs to ask you this, is my business subject to the Corporate Transparency Act?
I would say if anybody that's a small business owner that's watching this, I would say the odds, it's about 99.999% certain that your business is subject to this act and has to report. The exemptions are, like I said, the public companies, an inactive entity, a tax exempt entity, credit union, a bank, a broker dealer, a lot of different entities that already report to some other division of the federal government, right? That's who are exempted from this, because it's simply because they don't need to duplicate efforts. Okay. So what CTA gets at is everyone else, everybody that doesn't have any other reporting requirement, they have to report to FinCEN through this act. So but unless you somehow already report your ownership information in some way, shape, or form to the federal government, and that doesn't mean filing a tax return with the IRS, you're likely going to have to report to FinCEN under this act.
Okay, and what if you're a sole proprietorship? Is that considered a small business, Jeff?
No, if you don't have an entity and it's just you individually, you would not be required to report to FinCEN, but don't take that as a solution, because having no liability limiting entity around your business and shielding your personal assets from business liability invites a whole other host of problems. So there's no fix for this of, well, I just won't form an entity. That's not a solution. And I can tell you, having our staff going through and filing for the single owner entities, those are pretty straightforward to do those filings. So in terms of, I don't want to do a FinCEN filing versus, what could happen if you don't have an entity,
Yeah.
Just do the FinCEN, take it and do the FinCEN file.
Right. And I know that many small businesses are organized as LLCs. Is that what you're seeing, Jeff? As you're seeing a lot of LLCs now coming to the table to get this sorted out?
Yeah, LLCs became the dominant form of entity. Actually, just as I was starting to practice law, I was admitted to practice in 2000. It was back in 1997 when the IRS changed some rules about how they classify entities, and for the first time allowed for single member entities
Okay.
and changed for some of the rulings for tax classifications and made it a lot easier for business owners to use a single member LLC. And since then, it's probably about 80-20 LLC versus a corporation.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is if you haven't filed a business entity, you need to do that, because if you don't, the problems that can come are much greater than this issue. And then once you file, then you've got to be compliant with the Corporate Transparency Act.
That's correct.
Okay. I hear a lot of people confuse LLC and S Corp, and they'll say, oh, no, I'm not an LLC, I'm an S Corp. So I just want to insert this, even though this isn't our topic, because it's relevant for the listener. If you're an S Corp designation with the IRS, you still have a state level filing. So you want to go and look up where did you register your business to get it started. And if you're in the state of Minnesota, you would have registered with the Secretary of State. And most likely you are registered as an LLC. If you had an accountant or a lawyer do that for you, you might not remember what you are. So you can look yourself up. You can actually go to the Minnesota Secretary of State website and you can look up your business and see how you are filed if you don't remember, or if you don't have a connection with the accountant or legal advisor who provided that for you.
That's right. I'll say two things on that. First of all, if you did file with the Secretary of State here in Minnesota, and you go to the business filings page, the online search bar, and you type your business name in and it doesn't come up, there's two tabs there. One says active and one says inactive.
Yeah.
If you don't see your business come up, click the inactive tab and run another search. And if it pops up, here's what happened. You have to file an annual report every year with the Secretary of State. It's done online, it's real easy, and there's no charge for it. Okay. If you miss filing that report for 2 years, you will be put on inactive status. You'll be deemed to be administratively terminated, and you have to pay a fee to be reinstated and go back to active. Okay.
Wow.
So in the middle, you could be, closing a business loan or doing a transaction, and someone goes to check your status and finds out, hey, guess what? You're inactive. And you have to go back and fix that. So just a pointer on that. Now, one other thing to what you said, Christy, about the LLC and the S corporation, there's a difference between what you're filed with under state law and what you're classified as for tax purposes with the IRS.
Correct.
An LLC can actually be taxed as an S corporation. It's a matter of checking a box, and you can have an LLC formed with the, under Minnesota law, but with the IRS, you're filing the 1120S tax return as a S corporation. There's, the default corporation is the C corporation, then there's the S corporation. There is no tax classification called LLC. You're either a S corporation, C corporation, partnership if you have multiple members of an LLC, or a disregarded entity if you are a single member LLC. If you're a disregarded entity, you just itemize the income and losses of the business on your personal return. There's no separate return to be filed. The other types, partnership, S corp, C corp, there is a separate return to file. With a partnership and an S corp, the tax
Right.
liability passes through and the owners pay. So there's a difference between what you're filed as with the Secretary of State and what your classification is for tax purposes with the IRS.
And it's an important point because when people think they're a disregarded entity, they might think, well, that means I'm disregarded for the Corporate Transparency Act, and that is not true.
No,
The disregarded entity is only from the IRS. It's a designation. Is that correct?
correct. And it doesn't have anything there's no difference in terms of the level of liability protection either. Some people have come to me over the years and think that because they're an S corporation, that they somehow have a liability shield, but not with an LLC. Not the case. They both carry with them a shield over your personal assets from business liabilities.
Good to know. Good to know. So we're fitting in some other really relevant business information here. Let's get to what is the report that we have to file. It's called a beneficial ownership report. Jeff, tell us about that.
Yeah, Beneficial Ownership Information Report, or BOI. It's the information that's required about the ownership interests of a business. It's something that you complete the report online at FinCEN's website, or you can have someone like, a law firm. Our firm handles FinCEN filings. My paralegals are going to kill me if I keep bringing in more FinCEN filings, because it's like every day they have to do more of them, but we're happy to help. So what the report includes is the names of individuals that exercise substantial control over a business entity, or individuals who own 25% or more of that entity. So like I said before, it's 25% or more, or could be the managers of the LLC, could be the officers of a corporation, a board. Like I said, look in the operating agreement. If members have the ability to, even in a manager managed LLC, if members have some veto rights, it just reporting on the manager alone isn't sufficient. You still have to look to see, is there anybody that also owns 25% of the business, and it would have to report them as well. So it's all that information. It's names, it's addresses. We have to get front and backs of driver's licenses and scan those and upload those and submit those on the FinCEN website. So, and then if you have entity members of another entity, but particularly you see it with the LLC, you might have a parent and a subsidiary type relationship. You have to make sure that all of them, every entity gets filed and has their FinCEN number. So what we're doing now, even though we have entities that won't have to report until later in the year because they weren't filed this year, in order to do our new filings, if one of those entities is an owner that has control over this new entity, we have to then go back and first file everything ahead of it. I had one we were working on last week. We're back 2 or 3 layers to get these FinCEN filings, only so we can get the new entity filed by their deadline. So it is time consuming, and based on what I've seen so far, as frustrating as it can be for my staff dealing with it, I would highly recommend that you work with professionals, because we're going to know how many different layers we have to handle in order to get the report right. So that's what goes into these, and they can be stacked one report on another. So it can be time consuming, and you want to make sure that report is accurate. So that's what the BOI is all about.
Okay, Jeff, there were a couple of questions that came to my mind while you were talking. Let's see if they come back to me. One of them is, you mentioned that it's important to use a professional to do this, even if you're a small, single member LLC, or you're a smaller business. If you get this wrong, there's some pretty severe penalties. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the penalties for not complying with the Corporate Transparency Act, and we'll talk more about what the timing, deadlines, and things like that. But if you fail to do this, you can face. So for businesses that start this year that fail to file within the deadline, is that they have a 90-day deadline this year to file. They can be fined $500 per day until they file their report. And beyond that, officers and owners of a company can be held criminally liable. Say it again, criminal liability for this if you don't do it. And they can face up to a 2-year prison sentence and a $10,000 fine. So
Wow.
there are some pretty stiff penalties for not complying with this.
And I'm going to ask you about that again in a few minutes when we get into the reporting requirements as far as the deadlines go. So I'm going to have you repeat that.
Yeah.
One of the questions that came up for me when you talked about that you have to take on people's identification documents. And so this is probably a very rare case, but if someone doesn't have an identification document, so then they need to sort that out. Can they use a passport or does it have to be a state ID?
It's just a photo ID. So a lot of people are using driver's licenses, but yes, passports will work as well.
All right, very good. Let's talk about the deadline for a business to file that BOI report, that beneficial ownership report with FinCEN.
Yeah. Now there's 3 deadlines that you need to be aware of as a business owner under this act. The first is for any business entity that was filed prior to January 1st of this year, you have until December 31st of this year to do your FinCEN filing.
Yeah.
So a little bit longer time. So we're focusing right now on getting the new entities filed versus the existing entities. We're still working on getting notifications out because they have till the end of the year to get their filings done.
So, and I will insert, please don't do what people do to their CPA and wait until a week before the deadline and then ask for help. Please schedule this ahead of time. So you have till the end of the year, but you would want to get this scheduled by October or so.
Even sooner, because keep in mind, if you can imagine how many small business entities we have in this country,
Right.
if they all wait until just before December 31st, they're going to crash the server with a FinCEN server filing all at once, right? So when you're ready, go ahead and reach out, and we get you can have help getting these filed, or you can try to do it yourself. You take a look at. I would say take a look at it. If it's something you think you want to handle, go ahead. If you're a single owner entity, it might be pretty straightforward. If you would be more comfortable, given the penalties involved, having a professional do it, that's what we're here for.
Right.
So that's the first deadline. Is if your business was formed prior to this year, you have until the end of this year to do your FinCEN filing. If you have formed a new business entity on January 1st or after, you have, for this year only, you have 90 days to get your FinCEN filings completed.
So that's coming up fast for
entity.
anybody that first week of January.
Yes, that changes next year. You will have 30 days to do that filing.
Wow.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, if information in those beneficial ownership information reports changes, and like I said, it could be a retitling to a trust, a change in an address, a change in a driver's license, a change in a percentage such that somebody now owns 25% or more of the company. All of those things, effective this year and going forward, that's a 30-day requirement. If those are to update, if those changes happen, you have to do an updated FinCEN filing within 30 days of that happening.
Wow. So that's a pretty strict, any changes, you gotta make a new report, or you have to update your report, and you only have 30 days to do it.
Yeah, that's correct. So just stay on top of those and know that this is the new requirement. This is the new normal when it comes to business formations.
So you talked about the deadlines, you talked about the changes that we have to make. Would you touch again on those penalties? Is there anything more that you want to say about that and how we avoid those?
Just, making sure that everything is accurate and complete. And this is one of those advantages of working with professional advisors such as a law firm or a CPA that would be doing these filings, is we're going to see these over and over and over again. And so if somebody submits information, we know what information needs to be submitted. And if something is lacking, we can reach out to the business owner, our client, and make sure that we have the information that's needed in order to accurately and completely make the filing.
So is there backup documents that are needed for this filing, Jeff, besides identification?
No, just the identification is the only thing
Okay.
that you have to submit. Everything else is manually entered.
And then about the penalties, you mentioned that they can apply to officers and owners. So
Correct. Yep.
officers, could you define that for us? What is the officer of a company?
For a corporation, it's, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, CEO, CFO,
Wow.
COO, all of those officer positions. Again, anybody with the ability to control the entity. And then in an LLC, it's usually it's a manager that would be the equivalent of an officer.
That's very interesting. So this might go outside the scope of what you want to talk about tonight, but one of my questions is, hey, I outsource to a CFO for hire. Are they an officer in my company?
No, they would be, if you have a contract CFO, that's an independent contractor relationship. It's not, officers tend to have fiduciary obligations with respect to the company. A contracted CFO would simply be a contracted service provider. They
Got
may be
it.
providing duties. They're the chemical equivalent of a CFO, but it's not somebody necessarily that's on the line as an officer.
Okay, so the general manager or CEO would still be the one who is
Correct.
holding
Correct.
the cards here.
Correct.
Okay, very good. I've heard people even, speculate that perhaps a business coach or a CFO for hire could be liable if their client didn't file properly. And it sounds like that's not the case if you're just a contract.
There's still some
1099.
confusion as to what liability the advisors have, but my, everything from the law firm to whoever. But I think that if there's a way of doing it and avoiding that kind of liability.
Another good reason, Jeff, to use a good professional like yourself.
That's correct.
And as a over 20-year business coach, and I know Alice can attest to this as well, is we always recommend to clients, no matter how small you are, the professionals on your team are worth their weight in gold.
Mhm.
Set the money aside and make sure you've got a proper CPA, a proper business attorney that you can call on speed dial when you have an issue. And when you have something like this, that they can take care of it for you. Jeff, I know you said your office has really reduced fees for this. Do you want to touch on that?
Well, I'll mention, so for single owner entities, we're charging a flat fee of $400.
Wow.
For multi-owner entities, we're still trying to get a handle on what would be a reasonable flat fee, but it does vary because when you get into, okay, this entity has entity owners and now we have to file those. And
Right.
so it does get a little bit, the multi-owner ones, we have yet to capture, the right, there's just no way of putting a number on that. But for the single owner entities, we can pretty much, identify how much time it's going to take. Back to your last point, Christy, about using professional advisors. Years ago, I don't know if it came up in a BNI meeting or wherever I said it, but I threw out a quote, and I actually did it it was another lawyer's podcast, and she framed the quote, and she printed it out and framed it, and it's on my desk at my office, that when it comes to legal services, DIY equals SOL.
Oof.
So I see time and again, and it's no fun for us as lawyers, right? I would rather help somebody up front and get it done right than to have somebody walk into my office with an expensive problem that they can't afford to solve at that point, only because they didn't take steps up front to do the right things. So we'd much rather do that good upside general counsel work than try to clean up spilled milk.
Great. It's a very good point. So just we just have a couple questions left, and then I'm going to open it up for Alice and Jude to ask you a few. So think about what your questions are on behalf of the people that you work with. So what does the Corporate Transparency Act, it's a federal level act, and this is a federal level filing with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is a bureau of the U.S. Treasury Department.
Mhm.
Does this act require a state level filing?
Not at the present time. And that's a very lawyerly answer, and I'll explain why I said it that way. Right now, we're sitting here in Minnesota. There is no Minnesota level Corporate Transparency Act. Okay. The only state, to my knowledge, that has implemented or adopted its own separate state Corporate Transparency Act is the state of New York. So if you're doing business in New York or have a New York entity, you would have to comply with their state law in addition to besides the federal CTA. Okay.
Okay.
Now, when I say not yet, there's certain trends, if let's say California decides to adopt its own Corporate Transparency Act, right? Minnesota, one of the things that our government tends to do is if New York and California are doing it, then maybe they'll look at it. So if other states start to adopt their own corporate transparency law, then I would see Minnesota possibly doing it. I'm not aware of any current proposed legislation that would enact a corporate transparency act here in Minnesota. So at the time being, no, but just, be aware, keep in touch with what's going on at the state capitol, and be prepared to voice to your elected officials your thoughts on whether or not we should have, a Minnesota level. But at this time, no, just only New York so far.
And what if my business is filed outside of the United States, but I'm doing business inside the United States? I probably need to file. Number one, I suppose that would be.
Well, it specifically applies to domestic businesses.
Okay.
That have to be registered with a state.
Yeah.
So if you have a foreign based entity, but maybe you're filed, so you have some sort of a qualification or some sort of state authorization to do business, that would arguably subject you to the Corporate Transparency Act.
Okay, good to know. And then what do you make of the legal challenges that we've been hearing about?
Yeah. So the big one that's made the headlines is a federal judge in Alabama ruled that the CTA was unconstitutional. And I'm not going to get into all the reasoning behind it, but essentially saying Congress didn't have the authority to enact it because the federal government, the way our Constitution is set up, the federal government is has limited powers. And so it can't, it can't act on everything the way a state government can, right? That's the way our system of federalism is set up, is that the states have the power and the federal government has limited powers. So that's the argument the judge is making. Every expert and commentator that I've read or heard from doesn't believe that the ruling will stand. It will be it will be appealed if it already hasn't been. And the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is very likely to overturn this decision and hold that it's not unconstitutional. If the 11th Circuit doesn't, then it ultimately end up at the U.S. Supreme Court at some later date. But one thing to make clear, and this is specifically important for those folks that have filed a new entity this year, is the one ruling that's out there only stays enforcement as to the plaintiffs in that lawsuit. It does not stay the enforcement of CTA for every small business in America. So if you have filed a new entity, the clock is ticking on 90 days. you're going to have to do that filing. For those that have till the end of the year to do that filing, yeah, maybe you want to wait and see how this all plays out in the 11th Circuit. But for those that have filed a new business entity this year, you can't wait for what happens with that Alabama federal judge's decision. You're going to have to go ahead and do your filing.
Okay, very good. A number of years back, Jeff, I worked with a group called the Office of Advocacy. They're a division of the SBA, the Small Business Administration, which is a federal organization that we're all mostly familiar with. Most people think of the SBA for loans, business loans and real estate loans. And the SBA has this not very well-known Office of Advocacy. And one of the things that I learned from the OOA, which was very active in those years 2016 to 2020, and I haven't really seen that same level of activity now since the new administration in 2021. The OOA has on their website where you could make comment, where you could make public comment on a regulation. So if there was an act that was passed and then there was regulatory compliance attached to that act, you could actually go and make public comment on that. So as a follow-up question, you don't have to answer this tonight, but as a follow-up question, I'd like to know if there is a place where people can make comment on the regulatory implications of the Corporate Transparency Act as it applies to very small businesses.
That's a really good question. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I will say in general, when a federal agency is proposing new rules and regulations that they're putting out there because Congress has told them to do so, right?
Yeah.
They very often, almost always, open up those proposed. It's part of the rulemaking process that they accept public comment. That we went through that number of years ago with the Securities and Exchange Commission after the Jobs Act, when
Yes.
Congress told them you will pass rules allowing equity crowdfunding. And so they came up with Regulation CF, and they were sent back to the drawing board a few times because lawyers and other business owners said this doesn't cut it. Go back and do it. I've seen, I work with a lot of breweries and distilleries and wineries as clients, and the Alcohol, Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau or Trade Board, they will put out proposed rules and have comment. So there's a lot of places, whatever agency is putting out, rules, there will be a point where the general public can offer feedback. In terms of laws, always reach out to your elected officials. At the federal level would be Congress and the U.S. Senate, and let them know, hey, this is a very burdensome task, or we have some ideas as to how to make this better. Those kinds of things, always go ahead and take advantage and contact them and register any feedback that you have.
Very good. So with that, I want to open up for other questions. Alice and Jude, what do we want to know from Jeff on this topic?
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much for this. It's very important, and Christy for organizing this as well. You mentioned something about nonprofit entity, even on small size. They are required to report this as well. And it's the same thing that applies to business applies to nonprofit entities, right?
It does apply to some nonprofits. It doesn't apply. So if there's a nonprofit that's filed that has received its exemption under 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, that type of organization does not have to report. At the present time, something like a homeowners association is required to report. But as I understand, that's one of the fixes that is in front of Congress right now, is to take that away so that you wouldn't have to have, a homeowners association do that kind of a filing. So again, there's certain things that, whenever there's a law passed and then people ask questions about, well, what about this? What about that? Then they sometimes go back and have to fix things. So generally speaking, this is for-profit companies, but yes, there possibly could be some nonprofits scooped up in this, but not a 501c3. They're exempt.
Good to know. Alice, what are you
For-
thinking?
Well, one of the things that was coming across my mind is for companies with a board of directors, does this need to be like a formal in writing board of directors versus an informal, hey, these are my advisors, I call them my board, but they're not legally tied to the company?
Yeah, it would have to be, say the board, for a corporation, a board of directors, a board where the members are acting in a fiduciary capacity. That would be considered parties in control of the entity. So yeah, so it wouldn't be a board of advisors. That wouldn't be, they wouldn't have fiduciary roles. It would have to be an actual director role.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. So thank you for that. Fiduciary responsibility is kind of the theme throughout this.
Correct.
Excellent.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, what I am going to say is, so we've recorded this. We are going to post this on Facebook in some different groups, and I would recommend that any of us post it on our personal profile. And I think, Jeff, we want to have you back for an update maybe in a few months and just talk more about this if anything new has unfolded, and also to remind people to get started on working on this. I know that it's easy to procrastinate if you think you have a lot of time. So if you filed before January 1st, 2024, and you have until the end of 2024 to file, you still don't want to put it off for very long, because you don't want to overwhelm the professional that you work with. And you also want to have your ducks in a row for this so that you get it right. And I just would look forward, Jeff, to any updates if you just want to check in with us, any one of the three of us, as the weeks go by here, and let us know if you've heard something new on this topic, or if you think it's time to do an update. We'd love to have you back.
I would love for you guys to have me back and to do an update, particularly with the court case, and if there's any other court cases, just to let people know what the current status of things are, or if there's any rules that they come out with that changes, or a fixer bill, any of those kinds of things. I'm happy to come back and talk about those things.
I'd also like to just do a shout out, Jeff, for the article that you wrote for Upsize magazine, which is published in the Twin Cities area. And I'm not sure if it's published across Minnesota even, but Upsize is a great resource. And you have an article that you wrote. Which issue was it? Was it the March, April issue?
It's the March. Yeah, it's the March, April. I don't know if I haven't looked at the website in the last week. So I know they still had the January, February issue up, which incidentally I was interviewed for something else in that issue. But for this one, if you look at Upsize Mag, I think it's upsizemag.com.
Upsizemag.com. That's right.
Yep. If it's not up there already, it is probably another week or so, because normally the publisher flips it over in the second month of the 2 months. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's up in the next week at the upsizemag.com site, but it could be up there now. I didn't look today, but that's where you can find the article. You can also find it. I have my own personal site where I house all my content, and jeffreyobrien.today, under the articles section, I have a link to it there. And so if people want to go to it and download it, it's available there as well.
Very good. Jeff, make sure I get that. Okay.
Yeah, and Jeff, before you go, even your direct information for those small businesses that want to contact you, that want to take your service, how they can contact you.
Absolutely. So I'll give you my phone, my phone and email. So the phone number, so the firm is Chestnut Cambronne, and the phone number 612-336-1298. That's my direct line at the firm. And I've got a shorthand email that I give out, because nobody wants to have to spell out the entire name of the firm. So you can reach JOBRIEN@cclawmn.com. So JOBrien@cclawmn.com.
Thank you.
And you also mentioned, Jeff, that you have a website, and that was Jeff O'Brien Today.
Jeff, it's called Jeffrey O'Brien's, is a JEFFREYOBRIEN.today. So pretty much anything I've ever written, said, whatever is on that site. So it's a variety of articles, blog posts, podcast appearances, audio, video,
Right.
all that stuff gets housed over there. So I always tell people that there's thousands of dollars of free legal advice sitting on that website.
Awesome. Alice, I'll give you a shout out. People can find you at AMP. Can you share with us contact information for you and
Yes.
how you can help?
Thank you. Absolutely. So ampyourbiz.me is my quick shorthand website that shows you some more information about me and has all my contact information, as well as the opportunity to schedule a free consultation. Thank you.
Awesome. Alice is a fantastic business coach and consultant. And if you have a small business in Minnesota, then she's definitely a resource you want to know about. And Alice,
Thank you,
thank you
Christy.
for, yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for all the work that you've done with Paadio Consulting and the Small Business Center, and all of the clients that have come through there. Alice and I did a procurement ready training together over the last few years, and a contract ready training that was hosted by Jude and put together by his firm at Paadio Consulting. So Jude, do you want to share just for a minute about Paadio and how people can connect with you?
Sure. They can get to us through our website, www.paadio.com. And also they can reach me, my email, Jude, Jude, .nnadi@paadio.com. And I think when we share this information, it'd be nice to put the information in the body of the social media. Absolutely. So that people can actually grab it, and also website as well, which will be clickable.
Very good. Awesome. So we can find you at the Small Business Center in Brooklyn Park, which is a fantastic new space there. And I just want to thank you, Jude, for hosting this tonight. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Jeff, Alice, and Christy for bringing this idea to share within the community. So I wear different hats. One thing again is we have Underserved Business Month coming up this April, and we have event on April 25th at the Rotunda, the Capitol. So that's where we support underserved businesses. And I think we'll try to bring the information up during that event. So for people who want to know more, they can also find us out at www.edact.org about the Underserved Business Month.
Awesome. Thank you for your work with the community, Jude. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for having